Today, I want to say welcome to everyone who has taken the time to join me. I'm going to talk about something I'm extremely passionate about in terms of setting students up for success in the learning environment. And initially, this was to focus on school. However, we have a lot of different learning environments due to COVID, and lots of families do homeschool. So I decided to just change the title to Sensory Enrichment Environment to Support Learning. My name is Stacy Badon, and my background is speech therapy. I am a sensory enrichment therapist and an autism education specialist, and I currently provide parent coaching and training with my business, Everything Autism Beyond the Label. So I will go into my favorite topic, which is sensory processing and how that impacts our kids. And without going into, the purpose of this presentation is to talk about strategies or talk about how you can set students up for success. But I always like to at least introduce a little bit in regards to understanding sensory processing and how that impacts our kids. So if you look at the three sort of subtopics that are commonly discussed, that doesn't mean that there's only one and this is set in stone. I mean, only three and it's set in stone. But these are the ones that we commonly discuss in the educational setting from the direction of an occupational therapist. And we have kiddos that come in with that sensory modulation profile of a sensory processing challenge. And those are those kids that are seeking, right? They are either running around the classroom or having trouble sitting or moving, or they are covering their ears, not wanting to be in close proximity because they are just, their sensory system is over responsive to all of the sensory information they have to process. And when I say all of the sensory information they have to process, I think it is very important for parents and educators and therapists to remember our kiddos teens, young adults, are working very hard to navigate this sensory environment that we all walk and live and work and eat and sleep in. And it's a lot. You know, there are 8 different sensory systems that have to integrate, coordinate, so that we can respond to our environment. And a lot of times our kiddos, it's sometimes, it's not working efficiently, or there's too much coming in, and then there's a traffic jam. And so our kids really struggle with this in terms of the classroom learning setting. The other kiddos are those kiddos that are sensory-based motor, right? Those are the kiddos that are maybe struggling with sitting up in a chair, right? They're always slouching, or a beanbag is what they prefer to sit in because they're working on some of those motor motor planning, core, shoulder stability, and those kiddos appear to be not attentive, right, in the classroom because they don't look like they're paying attention according to the rules that someone has made for what it looks like to look like you're learning, right? And what we do know is our kids learn moving, our kids learn running, our kids learn jumping, our kids learn while they're spinning. They are learning while they're stimming. They are really able to process information much easier when they are able to get the support and do whatever it is they need to do to process the sensory information in the classroom. Now, yes, this is a struggle when there are expectations in the classroom, or administration has expectations, or the teacher struggles with kids moving in the classroom, but we're going to talk about that. All right. Then we have kiddos who fall under that sensory discrimination, right? These are the kiddos that maybe they're not necessarily refusing, or they are technically choosing or not doing their math because the numbers are jumping off of the page, right? The light reflection is giving them a sort of like impact on the white paper, and they're not able to actually see the numbers in an organized way. So what we see, what teachers see, is a child pushing the paper away, and then we flag behavior. Well, technically it's behavior, but it's really a communication of, I need help, I need support because I'm not able to process this information. So what can we do in the classroom to support our kiddos and in the home learning environment so that they can process a little bit easier with our support and learn. So unfortunately, those students with autism or our autistic students who experience sensory processing challenges in the classroom are often labeled as a behavior problem. And personally, I have a problem with that because I realize, based on what I've learned, but also as a speech therapist, and I love the presentation that was right before mine, talking about language. And I always felt like the communication was so important for our kiddos in terms of helping them to navigate without a communication method, because that's really hard, right? So I always felt like communication was, of course, a priority for our kiddos. And then I learned about sensory processing disorder and sensory integration therapy. And that was a game changer for me as a speech therapist and an educator. And I just want everyone else to know because it makes a difference. So in terms of our kids, not having those learning opportunities at home or at school and parents having to supplement at home, there are lots of things that we can do in the classroom that really are very simple. And I think it's a matter of sometimes educators push back on providing sensory input or sensory breaks, which not my favorite term because it's misunderstood in terms of what you use sensory activities for. And I'll go ahead and just sort of talk about that with this slide in terms of our kids looking as a challenging behavior. When a teacher says, well, I give them sensory breaks, right? So a sensory break is after they've gotten overloaded and then you expect them to have 10 minutes in the corner calming area with a fidget and then they're ready to go. Well, that's not always helpful, and that's why the teachers say this is not working. We do the sensory activities, they're not working. Well, we have to do them correctly and we have to individualize them, and we really have to be proactive. And that means knowing and understanding your students' needs, your child's needs as well, if you are teaching at home. So one of the things that is really important is to proactively provide the sensory activities your child needs before the learning activity or during the learning activity if you're really good at planning and coordinating activities so that they can get sensory regulation while they're learning. That's a super, super plus for kiddos. There are some teachers who are really great at allowing kids to pace back into the classroom in order for them to regulate and process everything that's going on in the classroom while she's teaching. And that's a sign of a really, really, really great teacher, in my opinion, because she's allowing the child to learn in a way that works for him. But she structures it, right? She's not letting him necessarily disrupt in terms of other kids may not be able to process someone moving, right? And when I say disrupt, I'm not speaking in terms of our children misbehaving. I'm speaking in terms of the reality of, for some kids, it's really difficult for them to process if someone's moving in front of them or to the side of them. So the teacher has an area that is sort of visual. It's a rug, and he actually can move on that rug. He can stretch, but most of the time he just needs to move his body while she is teaching a new concept. And this is particularly in math, which brings to mind that one thing in the morning that you may provide in regards to sensory for a student may not be the thing that they need in the afternoon. So that's where knowing and understanding your students is super important. All right. So we all hear this term, a sensory diet, a list of sensory activities that can help a child feel calm and sensorially organized. Then that allows them to attend, to learn, and my grandma always said, you have to behave, right? So that's my term that I use, but I'm never targeting misbehaving, especially when it comes to sensory, because I think we need to look at what's really going on and how we can set students up for success. And so behaving to their best ability within the expectations of the classroom, but balancing what the child needs and how that works within their daily routine. Now, I haven't thought of a new term for sensory diet. I understand why, because it's all about just the same as food, right? We provide breakfast and snack and lunch, and I think some people have a snack after school, and then dinner. So we are providing a regular routine of food intake so that we're not hungry, right? Ravenous, right? The idea is if you bring in food on a routine, on a schedule, then you're feeling really, satisfied, you're not hungry, and you can actually sit in a meeting, you can work, you can attend. However, when it comes to sensory activities, the concept of the diet is the same. You need to provide routine of activities with consistency throughout the day. And sometimes it changes. Sometimes you may have something planned, but maybe there was something that sort of either overloaded the kiddo, like a fire alarm or several announcements over the intercom. Those are things that can sort of disrupt that sensory organization if the child is not prepared for it. So thinking in terms of the diet concept is if we provide sensory input, sensory activities specific to the needs of that child, then they are able to attend, learn, communicate, request a break if they need a break. So going back to that break, when we talk about, I gave a sensory break, when I hear, and I'm not saying that teachers are doing it, I'm not against teachers. I think we're just not doing enough training. We're not educating teachers in the classroom about why sensory works, why it's important, and how the proactive part of it needs to be implemented in the classroom. So thinking in terms of you don't want to, let's say, have a child work on math, that may be sort of their challenging subject, which we all have challenging subjects. And when they are working on math, especially if it's learning a new skill in math, we may need to provide them with some really good sensory activities. Let's say that they need some really good vestibular, some good proprioceptive. There are things that you can do in the classroom, or if you have a sensory room in your school, but definitely in the classroom, you can do many things. And the concept is to provide that before the activity so that they are at their most organized state to attend and learn and to respond to you with whatever their communication method may be. So thinking of how that looks, right? An example in terms of my classroom with my little ones, we had a routine, we had a schedule, and the speech therapist came at 9 o'clock every morning. And one of my kiddos really, really needed to participate in speech. Speech was a really great time of the day. The speech therapist had awesome activities to facilitate communication. However, at that time of the day, I found that he was really, really struggling to just attend and participate. So what I decided to do was, during the circle time, where we sit around and we sing and do the calendar, instead of having this student sit at circle time, which means he would have to process all of that singing and closeness and people touching and having to respond, all of that. So by the time we finished circle time, he just had nothing else to give, right? He was just like, oh, that's it. And so speech was jumping, jumping, jumping. So what I did is I put a trampoline. I had a trampoline in the classroom, but during circle time, for that 25, 30 minutes, he jumped on the trampoline while we did our circle time. Now, what's great is he's still in the room, right? He's right there on the sidelines, taking in everything that we're saying while he's regulating himself, getting that proprioceptive joint compression while he's on the trampoline. And when speech therapist walked in, guess who was able to come and participate with the group? And I'm not I purposely did not say guess who sat at the table, because I do think that sitting at the table sometimes can be a little overrated. I think that kids can sit on a beanbag on the floor. Children can, who are really struggling with that core and just sitting upright, they can, some kids can lay on the floor. That's that alternative seating, right? That's a whole nother conversation in terms of admin accepting that and all of those things. But sitting at the table is not always necessary for learning. And for some kids, it really is sort of counterproductive for them. However, thinking in terms of, instead of Brandon, me waiting, right, till the speech therapist came in and, Brandon's really struggling, I just proactively gave him what he needed in order to prepare him, and that gave him the ability to enjoy speech therapy and really participate and practice communication, which is what we wanted. So it's about changing that mindset of what is a priority and how can I incorporate sensory activities into the routine. And yes, it takes coordination, it takes planning, it's a lot of work. But when you do the work to set the students up for success, the day is so much smoother for the child, which is super important, and it's also much smoother for the adults. So getting everyone to buy into understanding that is why I'm here, to share examples of how it can be done. And this is one of my favorite pictures. This is a little one that, I always wonder when kids are just sort of in their happiest sensory state on a swing or either just sort of spinning with joy, what's going on in that beautiful mind of yours. And so this is just a picture to remind everyone that our children are present. They are taking in everything. Sometimes there's just too much sensory information to process. And so for their own sensory safety, I just have to sort of check out for a minute and just swing and bliss, right? So that I can get back, which is great. All right. Question I always get asked: when should I have my student participate in sensory activities? And my answer is always every day with consistency and creativity, right? It is necessary. It is necessary. It is necessary. A lot of times our kiddos are, for lack of a better term, resistant to going into the cafeteria is because it's overwhelming. Sensory, it's just overwhelming. There's smells, there's noises, there are teachers talking, students talking, there's close proximity. It's a lot to process, and our kiddos are really working hard every day. So we have to provide them with what they need. We have to be proactive about it. All right, so this is a simple example of, and this is what I want to share, is just some different examples of what you can do, because it's 45 minutes. There's so much that I can talk about on this topic, but I wanted to just get everyone who is here and listening to start thinking about what you can do within the classroom learning environment, whether it's at home or in class, to provide that sensory input while they're learning. So this is a kiddo that totally enjoys anything that has to do with shapes, and he needs some really good tactile proprioceptive input to really stay organized when we are doing learning activities. So of course, before this activity of putting the shapes together and putting the puzzle together, he's had all of his, proprioceptive, vestibular. However, to maintain his engagement, to provide him with that extra layer of support, I've actually put the puzzle on a sticky, it's like a contact paper, and it's the sticky paper that I think you can line the shelves with, but I put the sticky side out, and so he actually sticks the puzzles, but every now and then he will put his hand and get that resistance, right? Or he'll put his finger and get that resistance, and he's getting that tactile proprioceptive feedback, which keeps him engaged in the activity. And so I'm actually able to do some communication things with him, right? Talk about the shapes and expand on his language in terms of socially engaging, because he has what he needs to be able to attend and organize his thoughts, and also organize motor planning. It's a lot. All right. The other thing that I encourage teachers to do, and this is a very extreme example, but I like to show extreme examples because then at least you can, it's like, oh, okay, wait a minute, it's a lot. But these are things you can do at home. And if you have a large classroom or a sensory room in your school, you can do this as well. I will admit, I've tried to make this spider web several occasions. It never quite looks like this, but it's a really great activity for learning and providing sensory input at the same time, because they're not sitting, they are moving their body, and it's really simple. It's like painter's tape, and for this one, it's like little magnetic letters, right? So if you have a little one, they can walk the line, reach down to get a letter, and then either you can say the letter, right? Oh, you found a P. And if they have echolalia, they may say P back. They may not say anything back, right? It's not about demands on them to say anything. It's really teaching the letters. You model what you have to model, or they say the letters if they know the letters, or use their AAC device, however they are communicating. But the idea is that they are able to attend and stay engaged because they're getting what they need. They can jump on the line, so they're getting that proprioceptive joint compression, right? They can bend over, they can spin and get a little vestibular if they need to. The idea is that you're providing something that is structured, but it gives them an opportunity to move their body while they are learning letters. And I also have a teacher that does this activity with sight words, and she also does this activity with multiplication facts. So think about those little things that our kids have to just sort of like memorize, because I'm older. We did old school, just memorize your multiplication facts, right? We didn't do all this window pane, 50 steps to get to an answer that they do now. But there are some things that are just about, sort of practicing. And I'm not a huge proponent of flashcards to just sit at a table. So I really like it when you can incorporate either word cards or items into something that they're moving their bodies. The other example is to get really creative in terms of kids practicing letter formation or shape formation, or just to sometimes get them to attempt to make handwriting strokes. And a lot of times when we put in the pencil component, right, when we say, okay, we're going to get our pencils, if our kiddos are not getting that proprioceptive feedback, if they don't have the hand strength and the motor planning and the motor coordination, then they're either going to hold the pencil really, 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 really hard, right, because they're not getting that input, or they may not be able to hold the pencil to move it and sort of guide it to where it needs to go. So yes, there are other things you can do, like weight the pencil down, tons of things that we can do. But initially, sometimes we just need to introduce it with a sensory-based activity so we can engage them, but also provide them with support. Especially when they're younger, right? When they're younger, there's so many things that we can do that just make learning fun. It should not just be worksheets and flashcards and worksheets and flashcards. That's not, it's just not a really good way for learning to apply information, right? It's just drill, drill, drill. And it also is boring. It's just so boring. So why not just use the fact that we can incorporate sensory activities to teach and learn? Right. And so this is just a simple one with a Q-tip. And of course, kids can use their fingers if they want for letter formation. What I love about doing anything with finger paint, whether it's their finger or a brush or a Q-tip, is you can also use that activity to facilitate communication, social engagement. I'm always thinking about sensory regulation, organizing their system to set them up for success, but also incorporating those opportunities for communication practice and social engagement as well. Not overloading. I don't think that it has to be a constant engagement, but just those little opportunities while they're regulated to see if we can build some vocabulary and language skills in a naturalistic way. All right. This is another one in terms of if you think about you're working on shapes or letters, if you're going to have something especially for younger kids, the Play-Doh for some kids, remember, not every child needs the same sensory input. So this is an example of a kiddo that is learning his letters, right? Learning letters. And it's just a simple sensory activity that also kind of incorporates a little fine motor, but some hand strength of pulling the Play-Doh, rolling it up in a ball, and then making the formation of the B. If you think about a child having to do this activity, it can be a little sort of overwhelming when a child looks at this and it's like, oh, it's so many circles. But when you bring in something that is sensory-based, that meets their needs of needing to have that squishy, and putting that tactile, and even sometimes smelling the Play-Doh, they're going to be getting sensory while they're doing the activity, and then they've done the activity, right? It's about supporting our kids so that they can be successful. Because the bottom line is, not every activity we provide is exciting and fun. And I don't think that we are in charge of making someone enjoy or like something, right? A lot of times teachers will come to me and say, how can I get them to enjoy math? I don't know. How can you get someone to enjoy horror movies? You probably can't, right? However, you can help them and support them so that they can participate in the activity in the classroom by providing whatever sensory needs they need to navigate through the day. All right, this is another just really simple example, right? Especially for kids who love to do things sort of like patterns or just sort of making those, I don't want to say necessarily lining up, but for kids who like to do like doodling or repetitive sort of, and that's not specific to just autism, but this is a really good way also to participate in an activity to practice spelling with just simply incorporating something sensory where they can, and I say sensory in terms of when you have the Q-tip and you're pressing down, there's a little bit of feedback there, a little bit of feedback in the fingers. Just little things that we can do. All right. And I don't know if this is going to play. It's always a risk when you present. It always works when you're practicing. So I'll see if this will play, and hopefully there will be no glitches. All right. Perfect. So this is Joshua, and Joshua and I do, and I have permission from his parents to share this for trainings. Joshua is a homeschool student of mine that I used to work with, and this is his sort of sensory activity to get ready for the next task or whatever it is that we're going to move on to next on his visual schedule. And Joshua really, really, really struggles with like holding his core and just, you know, he just will slouch in the chair. So for helping him to regulate his system, he has this bouncing, and he loves the visual of that stretchy thing. And you can see I have him strategically placed so that no one can get hurt by this, which could possibly be a weapon, because that thing is awesome for sensory visual, and you get a little bit of wrist joint compression. But if anybody walks in the range of it, it can kind of catch you. It's a little rubber thing, but it's really fast. So this is what Joshua gets to do, and typically I'll have music, and I give at least 20 minutes, sometimes 15. He'll say he's done, but I always allow 20 minutes. And I say 20 minutes as a guide. Sometimes kids need more. But I tell teachers and parents, 5 minutes and 10 minutes is not enough. That's like someone starting a show and then they turn it off within 12 minutes of the show and you don't know what happened at the end. So you're really frustrated because you didn't get that end result. Or the server taking your plate away when you haven't finished all of your food. That was really good, and now you're really frustrated. And so then what happens is teachers will say, well, I tried the sensory, and it just makes it worse because they have a meltdown after. Well, that's because you took their plate away before they were finished eating, right? So think about and remember the child, remember the autistic individual, and that they need sensory regulation to navigate the learning environment. It can be very overwhelming, and there's verbal processing, there's demands, you have executive functioning. I mean, there's so much going on just to navigate a school day. So we want to make sure that we're providing our kids with what they need, and sometimes you have to give some time from something else, like I switched with the circle time, and allow that 20 minutes, because the bottom line is, and this is where this is where my buy-in came in, why I started to learn even more in terms of wanting to know how I could make the learning environment better for my students. It works. When I allow 20 minutes for sensory activity, they can actually do the activity in 5 or 10 minutes. I don't need the whole 30 minutes. So if you have 45 minutes allotted for math and you give 30 minutes for sensory input to regulate their system, they can come back and do it in 15 minutes. I mean, and of course I'm generalizing, right? But the concept is that if you provide students with the support they need, they can show what they know. They can show what they know. Now, there's other dynamics around that with communication, and of course that's another topic. But remember, they can show what they know when we provide them with that support as well. That alternative method of communication if needed, or sometimes just support. We have lots of folks that are verbal communicators, but also use technology for backup at times when needed. All right. This is another idea that I wanted to share for the classroom that is an awesome, awesome way to provide sensory input while a child is working. Now, this is not containing a child, right? I actually got this idea from a teacher that I worked with who had her reading center. She had these little book boats. And what she started to say was her students love to do their work. Like she was like, oh, sometimes they ask if they can go in the book boat to do their worksheet. So I thought, oh, okay, Joshua really needs to lean back, right? He needs a lot of support and he needs to get that. So I made this little workstation and it's just a big bin. I have some rugs that are sensory fidgets, right? Like he can rub his hand, he can pull if he needs that proprioceptive joint compression in his wrist. And the interesting thing was when I made it and I brought it to the house, I didn't know how he was going to respond. I didn't know how I was going to teach him. And I kid you not, I brought it in, I put it on the floor, I bring out the top, I turn around and he's already sitting. He just like went and sat in it. And he was just like, okay, this is good. This is good. And then lo and behold, he was able to do some homeschool computer lessons. He actually would, when I wasn't there, his mom said that he would go and sit in his workstation. So thinking in terms of this is an example of supporting a student with what they need so that they can show what they know. They can be in a position. They can be supported with a way to get their sensory needs met. If he needs to lean back to get that deep pressure, he can do that. And he's not going to fall out of the chair. So I don't have to say, Joshua, don't, because he would, how some kids lean back on the chair. And of course, I understand why they're doing it. And I don't like to tell kids to stop, but I also don't want them to fall because I do know that sometimes we do fall if we lean back too far. So thinking in terms of really, really simple ways that you can incorporate sensory into the learning environment that are really simple. And it's just about planning and preparing and knowing your kiddo. And I will say, I also have a teacher, I don't have photos, but she has each of her students made their own and decorated their workstation, and they can choose when they want to work in their workstation and when they don't, which is really great because we want our kids to be able to identify their needs. And as they get older, they get more proficient at it. So that's why we, as the adults, need to understand their needs so we can and advocate for them so that they can learn how to advocate for themselves. Super important. All right. This is another example of how you can incorporate and create a sensory enriched environment for learning, right, in general. And let me see if this will play. I'm not sure if it will. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just let this play through. I actually am talking in the video, so I will pause and let the video play. I tried a new sensory activity today, and all you need is a flat container for usage and storage, 2 chopsticks, Epsom salt, which I tinted coloring, and I also infused it with lavender oil for the calming effect. Kids can use it for fine motor practice, shapes, they can write their name. For kids who have an aversion to some All right. That was a very spontaneous video I made about 4 years ago, but it's one of my favorites because a lot of parents and a lot of teachers have started incorporating this, and it doesn't necessarily have to look like the container that I have, but the idea is for kids to be able to have kinesthetic, tactile, sensory access or something to access that's tactile, but also, adding a scent. But once again, you have to know your kids. Lavender is typically very calming. Every now and then there's a kiddo that lavender has a different effect. So make sure that you know your children when it comes to using scents or essential oils. But I'm always thinking of how can I incorporate sensory input into an activity while kids have to engage in certain activities, right? And for example, if a child has to practice their multiplication facts, right? Once again, flashcards are boring, but it's one of those things that we just have to memorize and learn. And so using this, right, with their finger or with the chopsticks or anything that they can use to make it more engaging, but also they're organizing their system while they're engaging in the activity if this is the sensory input that they specifically need. So thinking creatively. Yes, we know the trampoline. Yes, we know the swing. Yes, we know all of those things. Well, most of us do. I know that some folks are still learning, but we kind of had a concept of that. What I want is for educators to think about what they can do to incorporate sensory into the classroom setting so that our kids can be success. All right, and this is I'll just play a clip of this, and then I'll talk about it. So he so wants to not be here. He does not want to do his lesson that his teacher has sent. And, whether or not I agree with the lesson or not, it has to be done. Mom is, making sure that he gets it done. So we're trying to incorporate it into a situation that sets him up for success. So one of the things that I've done is he has the option to sit on the therapy ball, but he also has the option to sit on the floor, right? And I don't want to play the video for the sake of time, but the concept is that this on the floor, and you see how he's providing his own joint compression, right? He's got really long legs, but he's providing his own joint compression so that he can actually attend, even though he really doesn't want to be good. He wants me to go away, but he does a really good job, and he completes the activity because I am allowing him to get the sensory input that he needs. And for him at this particular time, he doesn't need the therapy ball. He had already gotten some of that proprioceptive, and he just needs to have this joint compression. I can't sit like this, but it works for him. And I just want educators and parents to know that's okay, right? It doesn't always have to be at the table. I think we're just doing so much sitting in the classrooms, and we're not outdoors enough. And kids need to be able to move their bodies and learn in a position that's comfortable for them. These are just some other ways, right? This is my wonderful OT that I've learned so much from, and she does some activities while they're in the swing, right? You can do learning activities, sensory-based activities. Water beads are really great for hiding objects. You can work on colors, sorting. You can also put laminated multiplication facts. I keep going to multiplication facts because one of my students is working on that. But think about it in terms of when they're engaging and immersing in something sensory-based that organizes and helps their system to process information. It just makes a win-win situation for student and teacher, parent, educator, therapist. All right, more ways that you can incorporate some of those activities. This is one that I really like in terms of the sensory, where some kids like to squeeze the pool. They can squeeze that, or the pom-poms. And so you can do sorting, you can do counting, and they have the option to squeeze something and get those little, I call them sensory snacks, where I just need to squeeze something for a little bit and then I can go back to the task. And I think it's important for educators and parents to realize when your child distracts for a second or two or three to do a sensory or STEM or look out of the window, just allow it. When we allow children to get what they need and we provide what they need in a structured, planning, proactive scenario, it just makes a difference. It really does. And then they trust us that we're not going to take away their support. And then it's amazing. They actually just engage and they do the activity. And sometimes they won't. But, sometimes I don't want to do an activity either. All right. Sensory bins are great. This is my favorite. I just made a batch yesterday of colored rice, but I love using colored rice for different reasons. But it's a really great alternative for the classroom. It's easy to store, and it's really easy to clean, but I also have tips on how to less mess. All right. So with the time, a couple more minutes, what I would like to say as my final words is I encourage all of you to think outside the sensory box to facilitate language development and academic skills. And my email is there if anybody has any questions or if anybody would like any resources. I do have a website that has some free resources for parents. But what I want is for everyone to understand that our children, our kids, teens, young adults, and adults, but if you are teaching an autistic child, please understand the sensory is real. It is necessary. They are not running to the slide outside to avoid math per se. They need to get regulated. They need that input. So if we provide it within their routine and their daily schedule and provide it in terms of how much they need, not how much we think they need, right? They don't need 5 to, just need 10 minutes. I'm just going to give them 3 minutes. That's just frustrating. So think about the fact that, and remember, students are working hard to process all of the sensory information in the learning environment. The classroom setting is very overwhelming. So think about it. If you have any questions, just send me an email, and I appreciate everyone who came to listen to me talk about one of my favorite topics.